stories, relatable stories, knowing stories that allow us to understand maybe a deeper or more complex truth, and help us to learn how to live and how to act, and maybe can make some connections. And again, I love it. I'm a storyteller. I do struggle with being a topper. I will admit that there are times when I'm in conversation and someone tells something and I feel compelled to then go, oh, that's nothing, I don't want to be that guy. But there are times everything you tell me sparks some story of a similar event that I've had, or something not similar. Maybe it's something completely off track that just popped into my head. Any of those are true. This week, the story I want to tell, we've told stories about my wife and my kids and my mom, and this is just a story about all of us. And I think it was 2017, maybe. We went to Europe. We had this opportunity anyway, we had a windfall and decided we're going to, rather than do something wise, like put in an IRA or something, we are going to take all the kids. They were all kind of adults. Henry's the youngest. I think he was just started high school. And we're going to go to Europe. So we spent 2 weeks in Europe. It was fantastic. It was the greatest thing we've done. We did have a lot of fights around mealtime, because Europe is not, there was really no place in Europe that was set up for 6 people to sit down and eat together, and no place that we all agreed on. That's the one bummer of having all adults, is everyone had their own opinion on where to eat. So we used to laugh at, like, well, it's about time to fight because we're hungry and none of us can agree. I remember going to Paris at one point, and we were in Paris and went to a little cool cafe, outdoor cafe, and we're like, well, this is the last time we're ever here. So we sat down and then we looked at the menu and we're like, well, there's no way we can eat here. And so I was like, well, we're never coming back here. We're ugly Americans anyway, they won't know. So we got up and left, and the kids were just mortified that we would do that. I'm like, do you want to go to college or do you want to eat this meal? But this story is in Paris. So we started in London. And this also, we realized we have a pretty clear split in our family. There are people who want to go on vacation and do a bunch of stuff, and there are people who want to go on vacation and be on vacation. And Deb and George definitely were they are going to go do every single thing there is to do, which is great. But the first day, when we had all agreed, the first day we're going to stay up, we're not going to let jet lag get us, we're going to do a bunch of stuff in London. We got the Rick Steves walking tour of London, and Deb and George led us. By the end, the rest of us were sobbing behind them, please, can we stop? But we had a great time in London, and then we were going to fly, then we were going to take the ferry from Brighton to over to France, to Dieppe, and anyway, so we get to Paris. The point of that is we took the train to Paris, and we were renting a car in Paris. And again, nothing is made for 6 people. So we got the one large car in Paris, and it was kind of a station wagon, so people are hunched in. It wasn't really a minivan or an SUV. But the cool thing was, it did have GPS, like a Garmin thing in it, so we could get our way around. The guy explained it to us. He spoke fine English, but there was some definite misunderstanding, and I was worried about driving. Anyway, so we finally got it all set, loaded up, we take off, we put where we're going to Normandy, put it into the GPS, and we start driving, and we're kind of looking, and I'm trying to figure out the screen, and we're going down, sending us down these roads that get narrower and narrower and narrower, and I'm thinking, I don't think this is going to fit. And we kind of going the wrong way on a one-way street at some point, but everybody's honking, and we're driving for about 45 minutes, and we realize we are back at Gare du Nord, the place where we rented the train, or the car. And I'm like, how did that happen? And we realized later that every time I touched the screen, it reset where we were supposed to go, and was sending us back home. So we'd start going out, and then I'd go, oh, where are we going? And it would be like, okay, go back home. So we would see the freeway where we were supposed to get on the highway, and then it would make me turn and go back around. And since I had no idea, we ended up back 3 times at the train station. And finally we figured it out, and we decided, you know what, we're going to use our phone and pay the whatever it is to get data on our phone in Paris. So we were completely lost in Paris. The moral of that story is listen to the guy when he's explaining how to use the GPS. And if you don't really understand, don't go, yeah, I figured that out. Ask good questions so you can find your way out. Otherwise, there's a good chance you'll be lost. So we're going to talk today about the parable of the sheep, the 99 and the 1, and the parable of the lost son. But I think it's not the key to these parables, and you guys are all, you've been around a long time, you understand these, you've heard these stories. But to me, this time going through it, and I'm not saying this is the most important part, I'm just saying this is just something that occurred to me in the last week as I studied this. The key is not lostness, the key is foundness. The key is not how bad things were being lost. The key is that people were found, that the sheep and the son were found. And I want to focus on the finder today rather than the lost. So that's what today is. This is the found. So the story starts, though, to give context, starts in Luke 15, and the first couple of verses here, and I don't think they're on your screen or your sheet, but you're welcome to look them up. Says this, it says, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and the teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such evil people, even eating with them. I like this idea. It's important to remember a few things, and we've talked about this all the time, that I think this is one of the examples of Jesus that we need to follow. He sought out, and they sought him out. Notorious people sought out Jesus. And his response to them was to welcome them in. They came to him. They knew they needed something different than what was offered by the religious establishment. Notorious sinners knew they were not going to find love. They weren't going to find God by hanging around the good religious people. Instead, they go, there's something different about what Jesus is offering. And I love that it says, don't forget, it says often notorious sinners. They often came to listen to him. This was a regular thing. The normal people Jesus was around were notorious sinners. He responded by associating with them. When they showed up, when they wanted to listen, he didn't just allow them to be there, but he embraced them. He ate with them. When he saw a notorious sinner, he embraced them. When people saw notorious sinners, they began to think of Jesus, and Jesus began to be associated with them. And that was not a problem. I think sometimes in the church, sometimes in modern Christianity, we're so worried about what people might think of us that we abandon the ministry of Jesus. We're afraid that somebody might see us with a notorious sinner, however that's defined, and think worse of us. Rather, the reality is Jesus kind of didn't care. He was going to be with them. And this, of course, his being with those people that they saw as notorious, those people that they saw as sinners, made the religious established powers angry. I think, guys, this church, and sometimes us, have a reputation for welcoming addicts and strangers and marginalized, and that makes some other people mad. That makes other believers sometimes mad. And you know what I say? I wish that weren't true. I don't want to do things on purpose to anger people. But I am not going to abandon the mission of Christ. And I don't think you are either. We may make religious established people angry at us. And that's part of the mission. I remember growing up, we've been warned so often about, hey, who you associate with, that is your reputation. What others might think of you as being bad as them. And that doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to rub off on us. We don't have to act the same way. We don't have to do the same stuff, but we do have to love and associate. And words are empty. And I think one of the reasons people are leaving the church in droves is because words are empty. And when we say all are welcome, except for you, all are welcome if you act this way, all are welcome if you agree with us, we lose our credibility. And we lose the credibility of Christ. So we need to love everyone and welcome them and follow that. And so then he tells this story. So the Pharisees are mad, right? And so his response to this, I love how Jesus responds in such a way that they know it's them, but it's not an attack. The first is to tell the story of the found sheep. The found sheep, Luke 15, 3 through 10. And I'm going to add in here the found coin, kind of the same idea. So Jesus told them a story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he's found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. And when he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep." In the same way, there's more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God over 99 others who are righteous and haven't stepped away. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a light or a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she'll call her friends and her neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." And in the same way, there's joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. Love this. So we're talking mainly about the sheep. I was reading that about 100 sheep was kind of a normal flock back then. That was a reasonable thing. It wasn't like this outlandish deal. It's kind of normal. And reading about shepherding in the Near East at this time, that out in the wild sounds terrifying, but it wasn't. It was kind of normally where they were. And you've heard of the shepherd's fold, that they would build a little, with whatever they had around them, sometimes rocks, or they would have bushes or something, a little place that at night they would count up all the sheep. And they'd put them in an enclosure, and they would be safe and protected. And every night you'd do a head count. And in the open country, it was safe to have your sheep in a little fold where they could be watched at night. But because sheep are sheep, they get frightened and confused and injured sometimes, and they wouldn't make it to the fold. They would run off. And then the shepherd would go find them. This was a normal thing. I like that Jesus didn't say this is extraordinary. He's saying, of course, for sheep, if one's missing, you'll go after it. As the Pharisees have been mad at Jesus because lost sheep were hanging out with him. He's like, we even go pursue sheep if one is missing. And it's not that the 99 are not important, but that the lost are just as important as the 99. They are deserving of being in the fold just as much as the 99. Regardless of why they got lost. If they're frightened. And again, thinking, of course, Jesus is talking about people who don't know him yet, people who are away from God, people who have strayed. And I like that he says people who repent or people who have returned, sheep who have come back. So maybe they were part of this flock right for a while, but they've left, or maybe they've never known to be part of that. They are frightened. There's some event, when we're talking about people who are far from God, sometimes something frightens them. It's an awkward thing, or there's some experience that has made them afraid of the church, or afraid of religion, or afraid of Christians. If you have a pet, you know this experience. During fireworks time. Ginny is this beast that barks and people are terrified, this 110-pound lab shepherd mix. And one firework 17 blocks over, and she is cowering under the table. She's scared. She would run off. Deb tells us a tragic story of her dog that they left on 4th of July to go watch fireworks, and they left the gate open and fireworks, and it ran off, and they never found him. Horrible story. Ran off. Was frightened. There are people, rather than looking at somebody and going, man, they are horrible. I cannot believe they're speaking out and so blasphemous against God and the church, and they don't have any respect for Christians. You know what? Maybe they're frightened. And they have reason. Maybe some event has scarred them. Or they're confused. There are people that it's so easy that somebody who thinks they found a way to spirituality or a way to connect with God, and they may have wrong ideas all the way around, but they're trying and they have just a wrong concept. And it's so easy to then say, no, you're just wrong. How could you be so dumb? Rather than saying, oh, they're confused. They are lost because they're confused. They're trying, they have the right motivation, the right heart, the right understanding that there's something missing, but they're pursuing the wrong thing. They're headed the wrong way, or they're injured. People who have been hurt by life or by the church often will stray. The lost are lost for a reason. And we need to remember that. And even in that, we also need to remember that they're going to then act like they're lost. Right? I think sometimes we get so shocked, and especially if you've been in the church your whole life, If you've been around Christians most of the time, that you've been a believer for so long that most of your friends and most of your experience and most of your TV and most of your internet and most of what you read is all Christian stuff, and you bump up against somebody who's not a Christian and you're shocked that they don't act like a Christian. That's how they're supposed to act. They're lost. They're wandering around. And yet the shepherd faced inconvenience and danger and pain and change of plans to go and find the lost because they were valuable to him, and they were loved, and they needed to be found. Why do you leave the 99? Because that one sheep is worth hunting for. Especially because they're lost. They're not abandoned because they were stupid, because they made a mistake, they're confused or hurt or injured. They are valuable. It didn't matter that they were lost. Jesus' response to the lost, what does he do? He searches. He takes the initiative, and he seeks out lost people. Where was he going to find lost people? Among notorious sinners. He left the easy comfort of being with the 99 to go find the one that got themselves in trouble. And then had to carry them back. I like that the shepherd, when he found them, sometimes whether they're injured or not, the sheep would not want to go back. Have you ever tried to herd a sheep? Have you ever tried to herd any animal? Cat? Yes. It's not going to happen. Right? Carrying them sometimes is the only way. Jesus goes and finds them. We need to get out of our bubble, guys. And that doesn't matter where you are in life, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your career. We all have a bubble, and we need to find ways to get out of it. Sometimes it's as simple as talking to somebody in the grocery line. Sometimes it's, went up and saw my aunt. She's in a senior community, and she gets out and walks and meets her neighbors. She's like, I have to do something, and I try and just meet my neighbors and talk to them, and then has them over for tea. I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe it's going to the dog park. Maybe it's becoming part of the PTA. Maybe it's watching your grandkids play soccer. I don't know where you are, but find some ways to get out of the bubble. The lostness won't contaminate you. And if other Christians look at you weird because you're hanging out with notorious sinners, good. You're in good company. Just like Jesus. And what happens when we find somebody who is lost? When we find somebody who's lost and we build a friendship, and understand me here, I'm not saying manipulative or that all that matters, that we're making friends to see him come to Christ. I think we just need to make friends and care for people and love for people regardless, and some of them may come to Christ. But when that happens, that is an amazing joy. The joy is bringing somebody who needs God, needs connection with God, needs connection with others, to bring them back to the flock, to the love and safety and community of Christ. So let's do the detective work to find out where the sheep would go, why it ran, where it was most likely to go, and love people enough to go find them. The Good Shepherd accepts that people are lost and makes it his highest priority to bring them home. It takes hard work, and it is intense. It requires sacrifice. It requires action, tramping all over the hills. And again, I think that what I love about this is that it's just like with planting, just like planting the seeds, throwing seeds willy-nilly all over the place that we talked about last week. This is not a very efficient way to take care of sheep. God is not interested in being efficient. God, going after one and leaving 99, it's not cost effective. There's no good return on investment. He's working harder, not smarter. But the Good Shepherd knows what will really bring joy is not 99 good sheep, but one sheep that was found. That is the thing that brings him so much joy that he'll share with his neighbors. I'll tell you what will revitalize and cause a spark. We've already seen it here. In a church that is small and we feel like we have no impact, you know what it is? It's seeing somebody come to Christ and join. Not become a member, but just become part of this family. We've already seen that. And when that happens, if that was our goal, we should see that often. That will revitalize us way more than having better music. Way more than me preaching better sermons. But seeing people that you love and you know that you have pursued and you care for and see them come to Christ. And you know what happens to the 99? Sometimes they're safe and comfortable and waiting, and sometimes even get resentful when those lost sheep get shown up. I mean, how come the shepherd's carrying that sheep? I had to walk here. But then they get invited to be part of Team Rejoice. And that shepherd's back, they get to rejoice. So let's have the same attitude as Jesus has toward lost folks. Let's not be willing to have even one sheep be lost. Let's love them and care for them. Let's go out and pursue. Doesn't matter why they're lost. Doesn't matter how they act when they're lost. Let's pray for them, care for them. And you guys know I'm not talking about not having boundaries or not being wise, but there are people that we can care for and pray that they will come to know Christ and join the 99. So let's look for and understand individuals, not to add to our number, but to see them know the joy of knowing Christ. I think that's the narrow way. Specifically for Restore, I think we have to think this way. We're going to find individuals, love people, and care for them regardless of what their lostness looks like, and bring them to Christ. The point of the story is not only the return of the sheep, but the rejoicing at its rescue. Jesus is stressing by example and by direct statement the priority of seeking out the lost. And then a story we all know. This is in our culture. The second point, the patient father, the found son. The prodigal son, man, it's in our culture. Everybody knows this story. And let me just read real quickly to illustrate the point further. Jesus told them a story. A man had two sons, the younger son, and told his father, I want my share of the estate now, before you die. So the father agreed and divided up his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all his belongings and moved to a distant land where he wasted his money on wild living. We're not going to go into wild living, but there's all sorts of wildness that went into his living. About that time his money ran out. A great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. And he persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. And the young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs began to look good to him. But no one gave him anything. And then he finally came to his senses, and he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare. But here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both you and heaven, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son, but please take me on as a hired servant. And so he returned home to his father. And while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. And filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But his father said, that's my translation. His father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, and now he is found. And so the party began. We'll end with this. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. And he returned home. He heard music and dancing at the house, and he asked one of the servants, what's going on? Your brother's back, he was told, and your father has killed the fatted calf, and we're celebrating because of his safe return. And the older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. So his father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I have slaved for you and never once refused you a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never gave me one young goat for a feast with my friends. And yet when this son of yours, not my brother, when this son of yours comes back after squandering his money on prostitutes, and you celebrate by killing a fatted calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate this happy day. Your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found. What an amazing story Jesus tells him right there. And I think both the notorious sinners and the Pharisees knew who was who in this story. God is the Father. Notorious sinners are the prodigal. And the Pharisees are the older son. Just a couple of points and we'll be done. I mean, that story, you probably don't even need to talk about it, right? That's a story we can just read and know what God wants us to do. The father, but I will throw this out, father was waiting and hopeful. similar intensity as the shepherd going out looking for the sheep. Same thing. I can imagine that he was constantly, everything he did, every day was looking over his shoulder, looking down that road, thinking maybe today's the day he's coming back. He was waiting, anxious for his return, looking for any clue. I think, there's a famine. He knows that there's a famine, and wondering how his son is doing and wonder if he's going to come home. And he had prepared. He probably had his own little speech planned. He knew what he was going to do when his son came home. He knew how he was going to respond, regardless of the condition of the son when he returned. So the son has his speech all prepared. I love this part. The son is there, and I think the son is still struggling because he has a speech all planned. He's willing to change, go back and work for a living, and he's going to be humble and no more squandering. But he still has this attitude, I'm going to fix this. But rather than relying on the grace of his father, he has a plan. He has a speech. He's got it figured out. I think we do that so often. Our repentance comes with how we would fix it. And usually, just like the prodigals, his plan was so much worse than the plan God had. Like, hey, you know what? I've got it ready. I'm going to go back and I'll just be a servant. His father interrupts him in the middle of his speech. It's my favorite part of the story lately. Got it all planned out. I do this all the time. Lord, here's how we should. I'm praying for these specific things. This is how I want you to fix things. Make this the way it works. And I kind of wish God would just go, did it. I got it. I know what you're trying to say. I have a better way of doing it. God's plan was so much better than the son's. The line, though, that actually I kind of got choked up reading this week, over and over, as he sees the son, he's looking over his shoulder, he looks down the road, and he sees him, and he's filled with love and compassion, and that motivated him. He was so glad to see this lost son who had done the worst thing he could do, had taken his money and spent it on prostitutes. His response to that moment was like, finally, now we'll see. He wasn't waiting for him to be sorry enough. He didn't wait for him to get there and say, okay, so what did you do wrong? How are you going to change? He runs to his son, and he embraces him, and he kisses him. The son is found. The hero of these stories is the finder. When we see someone coming back to their senses, repenting, changing, do we have so much compassion that we won't even let them finish their sorry? Or do we want to make sure they're sorry enough? This is not a how to forgive lesson or sermon, but the point is, I think our attitude, when someone is lost and wants to come back, needs to be, you are forgiven, and let's lavish the love of God on you. Unconditionally. And then the big brother, of course, shows up. And he hears the noise. And he hears the party, and he's ticked. Because he's been following the rules all along. You notice at the beginning it says that the father divided his estate amongst both sons. And the older son still stayed and worked, even though he had all the stuff. Could have done the same thing. And so I kind of got to admit, I get it for the older son. That could be hard. But to the older son, it's all about himself. To the father, it's all about the lost. I think as the church people, we need to have it all about the lost. It's all about what Jesus wanted. He's had it all along. I love the father saying, no, you've had all the joy and the connection and the pleasure of being with me all along. It's sad, but one person, the older brother, refused to join in that celebration. He missed out on the celebration. But the father pleads with him, rather than chastising the older son. He doesn't even chastise the older son. He pleads with him and he says, look, this is a great event. Your brother was dead and he's now alive. I love that language. Not that he was lost and found. Not that he ran away and came back. Not that he was living wild, riotous and has come to his senses, but that he was dead and is alive. And we need to have that same desperate motivation for sharing the love of God, that people who are lost are good as dead, and people who are found are alive. That is a miracle that we can see every day. God is waiting and watching and worried and ready for the lost to come back. And we need to be willing to be compassionate and run to people when they begin to make that turn, when they come to their senses, to not hold against them their riotous living, and provide our own version of celebration and joy. And when someone does come back, let's join the party rather than resent the prosperity of the wicked. God rejoices over the recovery of a lost sinner, and therefore it is Jesus' supreme desire to seek and to save the lost. We need to rejoice and invite others to be safe in the fold and a beneficiary of the lavish love of our Father. We'll end with this, Luke 15:7. In this same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't stayed away. May we be a people who patiently and ceaselessly seek those who are lost, lonely, and notorious, and welcome them to join us as we together pursue a loving relationship with God through Jesus. Thank you. Have a fantastic week, and we will see you next Sunday.